The information in this podcast is current on the day of recording. It is general advice only and does not take your personal situation into account. It may not be suitable for you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is John Addis. I'm the founder and editor of Intelligent Investor, and I'm here today to talk about our second best growth business, second from 10, with Gaurav Sodhi, who's here this morning. How you doing, Gaurav?
Hey, John. Nice to hear from you again.
That's right. It's been a while. So today we are talking about quite a small business. Not many people have heard of it. We've only ever written an ideas lab on it. We haven't ever issued a formal recommendation. But the way I came into this stock, aside from reading your ideas lab about it, Gaurav, was through F1. I've never been interested in cars. My car is 15 years old. It's diesel. I'm going to have to replace it at some point, and I'm just dreading the decision because I just don't really care. But when I started looking at F1, that series on Netflix, it became kind of fascinating. I mean, this is such an interesting, I wouldn't call it a sport, but it's an interesting human activity.
You wouldn't call
which
it a
combines
sport.
No, not at all.
Racing around, what's the difference between people running and cars racing? I think it's definitely a sport. Sure.
Well, it's the way it combines engineering, like it's not. There is a physical aspect to it, but it's also so much technology and engineering as well.
Yeah. I'd argue that people running has become a technological art as well, as much as
maybe.
There's this book called the Sports Gene, and the author there argues that top runners and athletes are now just physical freaks who have very unusual physical qualities that enable them to do these supernatural feats. And without those incredible qualities, which some people try to replicate with drugs, you just wouldn't be able to see the amazing things we see now. But anyway,
it's hard to go from that to radiators.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're going to give it a go. So tell us about PWR Holdings. This is a small business, relatively small business in Queensland. It's run by a bloke called Keith Wheel. Keith Wheel.
Which is delightful for an F1.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Yeah. How did you come across this business?
Yeah, so I am actually a car nut. I love cars. I've got a loud, obnoxious V8, John, which I just adore, and my neighbours all hate. And I will have that thing over any electric vehicle forever. I told my son that you're going to learn how to drive in this thing, and he just wants an EV, and I'm heartbroken. But I love cars, and I've enjoyed.
This
F1.
is Gaurav not speaking like a resources analyst.
and I've loved F1 for a long time as well. I've gone to see it in Melbourne. Croops and I, my wife and I, follow the F1 long before Drive to Survive came along. But Drive to Survive has definitely made it more interesting. I almost think you can plot the share price of PWR against multiple seasons of Drive to Survive.
Oh, really?
It has been probably the most phenomenal thing to happen to F1 in its history. F1 has tried for years to crack the American market. There's a PE firm that bought into F1, provided proper management, funding, and strategy for the first time. And the only way that they were able to do it, crack into America, was to make this content deal with Netflix. And the success of that content deal, which formulated into Drive to Survive, that's the thing. After decades of trying, that catapulted F1 into America, which is traditionally NASCAR territory, which is the complete opposite of what F1 is supposed to be. So I've always been aware of PWR. I've been aware of the product. There's a lot of OEM supercars that use PWR radiators. I read all those magazines, I watch all those videos, and it's a personal interest of mine that led me to the stock in the first place.
Okay. So what's interesting about this, having this company on this list, is that it's engineering led, and we think about technology often in terms of bits and bytes, but this is a genuine old school kind of technology business in that it employs lots of fluid engineers, and when you look at the mechanics of cooling systems in F1 cars, they're incredibly complicated and important things. So can you tell us why Why do cooling systems in F1 cars matter so much?
So the engines in any car, but most importantly in F1 cars, generate an enormous amount of heat, and the cooling systems are required to cool the engine, make sure it doesn't overheat, and you need that so the car can finish the race. So the cooling system in an F1 application becomes indispensable, but it's a relatively small cost of the entire engineering effort. So Ferrari, for example, would have a budget of $200, $300, $400 million for a season. Even the most lowly F1 team would have a $50, $60 million budget. And of that, only a few $100,000 would be dedicated towards cooling. Ferrari might spend $1 million or $2 million on cooling. And that goes towards a absolutely vital function. So the reason why this is so attractive is because small changes in outcome lead to massive differences at the end of the race. So a cooling system that's only minutely better than the next competitor just means everything. And businesses, these racers, these companies will spend whatever they need to spend. They will pour resources into gaining that very small advantage that a better cooling system can provide. Now, in an F1, every cooling system is bespoke to that car for that track. So a Red Bull.
So they swap out the cooling system based on the track.
Well, the car will change on every track depending on the aerodynamic requirements of that specific track. So there's some tracks that have really long straights and not very many tight turns. Mm-hmm. And on those tracks, you probably want different aerodynamics and cooling than you want on really tight, twisty tracks where you might not want these big gaping holes to affect the aerodynamics. Now, there's a trade-off here between cooling and downforce.
What do you mean by this is the force that keeps the car on the ground?
That keeps the car on the ground, that's right. So, the most efficient way to cool the car is to leave big gaping holes everywhere.
Yeah.
But that limits, obviously, that changes the airflow around the car, and it also limits the downforce that can apply to the car. So you risk the car sort of.
So there's a trade-off between aerodynamics and cooling ability.
That's right. And the job of PWR effectively is to manage that trade-off in every car on every track. And that's why PWR at the beginning of the season, they'll embed with the manufacturers and they will design the cooling systems for their car for every specific track. And they'll do that at the beginning of the season and that will get renewed over the next season. In fact, their designs change so quickly and they're so bespoke that there's actually no IP associated with those designs. Someone can come around and copy last year's design and try and implement it, but that hasn't really worked because by then PWR has come up with a better solution or a slightly better change, which renders last year's work obsolete. So they don't even bother trying to get IP protection on their older designs. But the older designs reflect a built-up knowledge, experience, and trust. And those things you can't just replicate. You can't just turn up with those things, even if you can copy the designs.
Okay. So they're now in almost all of the F1 teams.
I think they are. They have actually got all of them. Now, there used to be a UK business called Marsden, which used to be the PWR of F1 back in the 90s and 80s. And PWR started in V8 supercars. In fact, Kees Wheel and his son are V8 supercar drivers. And they started this cooling business in V8 supercars, and then they got their first contract in F1. And look, I don't know how they did it, how they got so good so quick, but their product was just better. And they have forced Marsden over the years. I think it's taken about 10 years. They went from a market share of sort of one customer. They now have the entire F1 grid. They design the cooling systems for every single manufacturer on that grid. Internally, some of the manufacturers used to do it themselves. They now all outsource to PWR. So in the period of sort of 15 years, they've gone from being the challenger to the incumbent to being absolutely dominant. They now have the monopoly provider, and Marsden no longer do F1 at all. They focus on other things.
Wow. Okay, so it sounds though that this is still quite limited in terms of revenue growth, despite the fact they've kind of more than double revenue in the past 8 years. What about expansion? What businesses are they? What events and what races are they going into now? I suppose this technology could be used in lots of different applications.
When I first looked at this business, I thought the strategy would be to expand into other forms of racing and other forms of motorsport in particular. You know, F1 is the pinnacle. It really builds the brand, and it's allowed them to then make contracts for supercars and hypercars, you know, these sort of $1 million to $3 million vehicles that have production runs of a couple of hundred vehicles. PWR will have a contract with, say, Bugatti or with Aston Martin to build these, a limited run of those cars, and they'll make the cooling systems for those cars. That's actually been a significant growth segment for the business, and it comes from their reputation experience in F1. I thought that's where the growth would be, and they'd maybe go to world rally cars or other forms of motor racing. In fact, where they've gone is their cooling technology has now become so advanced. It is small, light, and the resources they have are now so good that they're changing to defense, to supplying the defense sector. So they're doing things like cooling for space applications, so rocket launchers, missiles, aeroplanes, and other things we don't really know about. They're working on cooling solutions for data centers and cooling solutions for even for heavy armored vehicles and things like that.
Wow.
And these are all, there's not a lot of detail on this. They wrap all that up into a segment they call emerging technologies. And if you break down the results of PWR, that emerging technologies is small, but is growing very, very swiftly. It's where they're directing a lot of effort. And so far, I'd say the results are still kind of hidden. And they're hidden because a lot of growth, surprisingly, is still coming from F1. And that's because F1 changes the rules every year. They're introducing more electric motors. There's just so many more cooling elements on an F1 car today than there was 5 years ago. I think the number is they now use, I think it's 12 radiators on the car compared to sort of 3 or 4 a few years ago.
Well, in your ideas lab on this stock, which I think was published, let me have a look. Probably a couple of years ago, This is in July 2019, so almost 3 years old now. But you said that the Formula One engine generates heat that is 2,500 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
So these engine temperatures are
half
as hot as the sun. I mean, that's kind of mad that you're driving around in something that bloody hot.
Yeah, I know. Well, these the engines are technological tool. These are things that are amazing. I mean, this is the pinnacle of human engineering, really. And it requires something extraordinary to keep these things cool. So this is not, you're right. I mean, early on you said this is not about bits and bytes, but this is about just the attention to detail and care about a very specific niche. And one of the things I really like about this business is that if you're a graduate in fluid dynamics, or you're a mechanical engineer, or you're a materials engineer, you know, you could go and work on, you could go work on Caterpillars or heavy machinery, or you could go work on Ferraris, you know, and, you know, it would be so attractive to get the best talent once you have built this reputation. The reason that I don't own it, and in fact it's never been a buy recommendation for us, is that the price has never made sense to me. I've introduced it twice at the Dragon's Den. The first time I think the rest of the team wasn't convinced by the quality of the business, and I probably just went into too much technical detail.
Why is that? Because it's too niche?
Because it has no IP protection, I think the thought process of the team was this is just an engineering services business. It has no competitive advantage. It displaced Marsden. Someone else could come and displace them. I don't think we find this often that in businesses where there's no obvious clear moat, where there's not a network effect, where there's not IP protection, it can be hard to identify what really makes the business special. And in those circumstances, I often find that the cultural relationships, brand, these things are nebulous, but they're incredibly powerful.
We speak about this issue a lot, and you can see it in a lot of the business that we've been talking about. Even in Lavisa, there are things in that business, and I imagine people is a lot to do with it, who are able to spot trends and respond quickly to those trends and get products in the stores that meet those needs within a couple of months. You can see it in a knowledge-based economy, which is, aside from resources, really what we have, and there's still quite a lot of knowledge in resources businesses. Yeah. It's kind of silly not to think about the culture of a place when you're really thinking about a knowledge business, because that's where often the competitive advantages lie. And like you say, it's very nebulous. It's hard to put your finger on what it is that makes this business special. But to me, when I read your Ideas Lab and I read a bit about the company, you can see this is a really attractive place for people who are interested in this stuff to go and work. It is the pinnacle, and they're probably not going there for the money. They're going there because they are at the bleeding edge of this kind of science.
Exactly.
And that in itself is a competitive advantage, I think. The people that business attracts is their advantage. And the fact that they're being embedded in these teams, and the teams, like the F1 teams, and the teams are kind of pushing them each and every day to respond to their needs and their demands. It's kind of the R&D department that you can really only dream of, I think, because it's out there in the real world.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the management here is particularly dedicated and impressive. My favorite quote from any management team ever, from any CEO, comes from Kees Weel. And I've mentioned this a few times, but Kees Weel has said in an interview, I breathe, eat, and shit radiators. and I believe him. This is a collection of people who wake up every morning with one focus. They're only interested in one thing. They built this business. It is astonishing. Look, I think we're seeing a lot of good stuff about it. I think there's a few things we ought to mention to explain why we don't own this or why we've never upgraded it. First of all, I mentioned the first time we upgraded it, it's not easy to grasp the quality of this business in the first place. Now, the second time I took it to the Dragon's Den, the price came up, and I think this is a sticking point. This has been, since the Drive to Survive and since F1 has become quite popular, this has become a bit of a darling stock, and it's traded typically over 50 times earnings. Even now, when it's come down in price, it's 40 times earnings. And I think that is a big price to pay for what is quite a small business, where the growth isn't coming from the parts of the business that are already made it successful. They actually have to go into new markets with new products and new sales channels to deliver that growth. So I don't think it's a slam dunk at all. And I would not want to pay 40 times earnings for this company. So I certainly wouldn't be running out and buying it today.
It does make you wonder when, like, revenue's growing at 10%, 11% a year. NPAT's growing at 14% a year. Earnings per share at 12, 12.5, I think. Where is the market seems to be telling you that is it electric vehicles and radiators for electric vehicles or something? It seems as though that there's a potential, there's a belief that this business could explode revenue-wise and grow in a way it hasn't in the past.
I've heard analysts talk about this, that they think that there is a belief in the market, or a belief among some people, that PWR is on the brink of being an EV supplier that can cool. It does have very good technology to cool batteries, but there's a reason why these guys are big in EV, in F1 and in $2 million supercars, and they'll never be used in a Toyota or a Hyundai product ever, because what they can't do is scale. The advantage of this business is that everything is bespoke and top of the range and advanced. And as soon as you require scale, a Bosch or another competitor who makes radiators is going to wipe the floor with them. So this is never going to be a scale business. It's unlikely to be growing at 20% a year. I think that 10% a year is what I'm estimating growth at.
Yeah.
So I think people who expect that from the business do not understand the business. It's not going to be a scale cooling business. There is a belief that
could they license the technology?
I don't think they'd want to do that. This is quite valuable, and I don't think that's on the plans. But the other source of growth here is they're in the running for a couple of largish defense contracts. And if they get those contracts, that will accelerate growth. But that comes with risks of its own. Now, remember, I told you the story of Marsden. Marsden used to dominate F1, and then F1 became a tiny part of their business, and they now are the market leader for satellite shuttles and aerospace. They call systems for all sorts of aerospace applications. And they grew into that market, and they lost F1 to PWR. And I worry that PWR is on exactly that same trajectory. They're now on the brink of growing into all these new markets. And the question is, will they be able to maintain their grip and their focus on the stuff that makes them so wonderful today?
So there's a management challenge there for Kees Wheel. He does seem like the archetypal founder. He's completely obsessed with radiators, as you say.
Yeah.
Is he the kind of person that's capable of making that transition and turning this into a far bigger business?
That is the question, isn't it? If anyone can do it, it's surely him. But I think we need to be careful about the price. I still think there's a lot of enthusiasm about this business. There's people who don't understand the company very well, and it's been caught up into all this growth hype. And I think we want to exercise caution. This is a remarkable business. I would love to own it one day, and I think we should all aspire, to own it. It should be on the watch list. I think it deserves a place on a list like this. But this is not a buy today, and we ought to be careful about the price that we pay for this company ultimately.
Okay, so in your view, PWR is running too hot, and we will let members know when it cools down a bit and we get a chance to buy it.
You've just been waiting for ages to say that, haven't you?
It's the only thing I've been confident about saying in the past 40 minutes.
Very nice.
Okay, Gaurav, thanks very much. That was very interesting. Enjoy the rest of the day. And if members want to check out PWR, look on the website, go and have a look at the company page, and there's an ideas lab there, which will give you good background. It's 3 years old now, but it's still worth reading. And there is also, if you go into their ASX announcements, there's also a presentation they did last month at the UBS Emerging Companies Conference, which is worth having a look at too, and that'll give you a good overview of the financial metrics and where they're going. Yeah, I think that I can second that. That presentation in particular tells you a lot about where the company's focus is now headed. And unfortunately, it's a bit further away from F1. Yeah, it is. Thanks very much, Gaurav. Pleasure. Thanks, John.